I've spent a lot of time thinking recently about what is exactly the difference between children and adults. Obviously, adults are bigger, but what really defines a child and an adult? Why do we set an arbitrary distance between you're a child, now you're an adult? What is the process of becoming an adult all about? And the more I think about it, the more I realize that the process of becoming an adult is the process of learning what to be afraid of. It's not that adults aren't afraid of things. Children are afraid of just about everything. Children are afraid of things they shouldn't be afraid of, like they're afraid of the dark and they're afraid of Santa Claus at the mall and that kind of thing. They're not afraid of things they should be afraid of, like live tigers in a zoo, let's say, or something that's glowing nice and hot and sparkly. And the entire process of becoming an adult is learning what to be afraid of and what not to be afraid of. That's basically what being an adult is learning what things you should be afraid of. And watching the fear about COVID-19, otherwise known as the coronavirus, spread through our society like a virus led me to want to do this episode. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And this right angle is about the virus of fear. It's about looking at fear. I'm not going to get into this disease. I'm not going to get into the virus at all, or at least I'd like us to avoid it as much as is possible. I want to talk about the idea that the fear of COVID-19 is spreading through society the same way that the actual virus is. And I've come to believe that the best way to contain the fear of the virus is to use the same procedures that you use to contain the actual biological virus itself. So, Scotty, why don't we start with you? We have an epidemic in America right now, and it's affecting virtually the entire population. And it is not a new form of virus. It is absolute fear and terror, and it's growing every day. Very briefly, what I think is going on is this. There are four horsemen of the apocalypse, right? And everybody knows that the apocalypse, this is it, the end of everything. That's the definition of the apocalypse. The end of everything consists of four things: famine, death, pestilence, and war. And of those three, war is visible and can be run away from. Famine is also something visible that is something you can keep an eye on. Death is almost like death is death, but pestilence is a primal fear. Pestilence is the one we fear the most. If you think about those four horsemen, the one that you do not want to meet is disease. Disease is killed so many humans. It's so deep in our subconscious. This fear of pestilence, of a plague, is rooted in our subconscious. And now that part of our subconscious is being activated. And if you don't believe me, think about what our culture does in order to excite itself. Virtually all of our entertainment today is some form of the zombie apocalypse, which is where pestilence comes and destroys life as we know it and leaves us suddenly facing the kind of barbarous choices that we thought we'd never have to face again. I think people's reaction is a reaction to what they saw with Ebola, which was containable. And as this virus continues to spread, as it will, because it's an influenza-type virus, in their minds, Scott, I think people are linking with the spread of the virus with the spread of a virus that is exceptionally fatal and mortal, and this simply isn't the case. So in terms of containing the fear, I don't want to talk about the virus, but in terms of containing the fear, one of the things that we can do, I think, is to quarantine the fear. And that may mean self-quarantine. That may mean that you may actually help stop the virus of fear spreading by quarantining yourself if you are filled with an unreasonable fear of this, a hysterical fear, an all-consuming fear of this virus. Maybe the first step to stop the fear is not spread it any further. And I'm talking about you, news media.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just news media, Bill. It's everybody is news media now. Right. If you're on social media, everybody thinks that they are a source of news. And the illusion that social media gives you, particularly Facebook, but others as well, it gives you the illusion that you are close to something that you're not close to. So you have a friend on Facebook who shares a story about a woman who got something that's scary, and that you think, oh, well, that friend knows this woman, but that friend does not know this woman. That friend is sharing something that she got from somebody else. And so you get the sense that, oh, that girl I went to high school with knows this woman who got this disease. There's only 2 degrees of separation between me and this disease. And it just ain't so. And when you talk about self-quarantining, I think the first step you can take is to acknowledge that your knowledge about any particular incident outside of your immediate contact is imperfect at best. And so redistributing that information is just creating more of the same kind of problem. It's causing other people to have concerns because now they know you and they think that you know this person that this happened to. And so, for example, there was a case that was a presumptive positive test for the COVID-19 novel coronavirus in Frisco, which is one town over from where I live. Now, does this affect me whatsoever? No. I don't even know the person who was diagnosed. The odds of me coming in contact with that person who lives in a town of, I don't know how big Frisco is, it's growing every day, but let's say 150,000 to 200,000 people, and I live in Little Elm, which is, 30, 40, 50,000 people, something like that. The odds of me coming in contact with that person are vanishingly small. Should I be concerned about it? Not at all. But there's an inclination on social media to go, oh, Frisco. Well, Frisco borders Little Elm. Oh, man, that's nearby. And so you want to circulate that. So I guess if you want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, don't circulate that. So, that would be my first advice, basically based on what Bill's saying about self-quarantining. And then there are two other elements that I think that have served me well over time in overcoming my own fears. Somebody years ago said that there are two things you should never worry about: things you can change and things you can't change. And so, and that pretty well covers everything. So if it's something you can change, well, then change it. And if it's something that you can't change, well, then why worry about it? Your worrying is not going to change the circumstances. And then the final thing is that usually if you're dealing with a fear, going all the way up to the fear of Hitler, let's go to the nth degree, two weapons: facts and humor. And that may sound like at odds with each other, but facts and humor are crucial. Bill has already started dishing out the facts. If you haven't seen this week's episode of Unfearing the Coronavirus of Bill Whittle Now, you should check that out. You can find that at billwhittle.com. But that deals with kind of the facts of the thing. I have found great joy in reading stories that The Onion is doing about the coronavirus. And even at my own little satire site, Scrapple Face, I did a story about how there's a massive shortage of sanitary, disposable, single-use hands that people have been buying so that they can scratch their faces and then throw away the little hands because you're not supposed to touch your face. Because I thought, what an absurdity. We're constantly being told by public health officials, here are the ways that you can avoid touching your face.
Don't touch your face. Yeah.
You can't avoid touching your face. Bill's touching his face now.
Don't touch my face. That's all I ask.
Yeah, just don't touch anybody else's face. I think that's fair. But, I think that at a certain point you need to have, it's not gallows humor, it's just humor. It's just realizing the kind of fallibility of humanity and being able to laugh at that. And that actually generates endorphins in your body. It's your body's natural opium that changes your attitude toward life. And so if you're not already doing it, tap into something like the Babylon Bee or The Onion, or even scrappleface.com, but I don't write there very often. You can, that will help you relieve your own fears, which may dial you back on your sharing of these horror stories that you really have no ability to check out and don't know how true they are or how relevant they are to anybody.
I just want to clarify this, and I'd like you to just elaborate just a little bit, Scott. I want to talk about the morality of self-quarantine in terms of fear. You may say, well, that's easy for you to say, but all these reports are coming in and I feel an obligation to share them with my friends. If you are afraid of COVID-19, just admit that you are. That's the first step. If you're afraid of it, that's fine. There's stuff to be afraid of here. There certainly is. But if you find that you are afraid of this virus, then again, connect it to the medical term. Consider yourself to have the fear virus. If you actually had the coronavirus right now, you as the person watching this right now, if you knew and a doctor had told you you've got the coronavirus, you are contagious now, would you go home and stay home, or would you go to work and try to infect as many people as possible? Which one of those two things would you do? Would you go and try to infect as many people as possible, or would you realize, no, I am now a carrier of this, and my first obligation to society is to try to stop or slow down the spread of it by self-quarantine. You can look at it that way, can't you, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we discussed before, there are serious health-related consequences from the virus. I mean, obviously, people get sick. There are a small percentage of people who will die. That percentage is higher than some other forms of sickness. So that's all legit. But what's really killing us, as far as destroying people's businesses, destroying people's jobs, destroying livelihood, destroying commerce, all kinds of things, is not the virus itself. It's actually the fear that is promulgated and spread. So that's the destructive part. So the moral decision is to say, okay, what is the impact I'm going to make? Do you really think there's anybody left in the world who doesn't know the couple of things that you actually can do to keep yourself from getting a disease that's socially transmissible that somebody else can get? Right. Wash your hands. Don't sneeze in people's faces. There's some basics that everybody knows. If you're sick, don't hang out with other people. So you're spreading that on Facebook is not adding to the pool of public knowledge. It's not going to save a single life. It's not going to stop a single person from getting sick. But what it will do is trigger that fight or flight mechanism in people's primitive lizard brains that says, I got to do something. This could affect me. This is so close. This is next door. And it's not. And you're causing illness in other people. And by that illness, I mean a mental condition of irrational fear that goes beyond the circumstances on the ground.
And here's where the fear virus impacts people's lives. If people don't understand enough about this, if they're not willing to look at the entire picture of who's at risk and why and how serious this is, if every single person who gets the cold and the flu demands to be admitted to the hospital and undergo thorough testing for the COVID-19, then the people who genuinely need to be in the hospital and who genuinely need medical resources aren't going to get them because people are so afraid that they have this disease that is not a mortal threat to virtually anyone in society, that they're going to end up actually genuinely killing people because of the fear, not because of the virus.
Bill, can I throw in something you helped me with last night? Because when we did our episode of Bill Whittle Now on this topic of unfearing coronavirus, I did a little research afterward because you brought up some things that I found were interesting. And one of the things that I didn't realize that at that time, there were some 3,900 known deaths from coronavirus in the world out of 100,000 known cases. So you're looking at a little less than 4% mortality rate from the identified cases. And it's probably lower because there are probably a bunch of unidentified cases. In any case, I read that and it said there was 3,900. More than 3,000 of those are in China. And almost all of them are right around Wuhan and the surrounding province. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. You get the sense that there are 4,000 people around the world. Well, actually, almost all of them are right where the nucleus of the thing started.
And almost all of them are over 80 years old.
Correct.
And everybody in China smokes like chimneys, and the air there is so miserable that everyone in China is suffering from respiratory distress before this even gets started. Now, this brings us to our next point, Steve, and that's what I want to address with you. One way to help slow down a disease or contain it, if it can't contain it, you can at least slow it down. That's why quarantine is a useful thing, even if it's out of the box, and it is. You can slow it down. So you can quarantine yourself against spreading the fear until you get your fear under control, until you fight your own internal battle with this disease and you find out which one wins. But the second thing that we can talk about is an immune system, Steve, a social immune system against fear. And that immune system consists of, at least in my case, it consists of understanding that there are two sides to every story and actively seeking out what the other side is. In other words, not allowing these fear viruses into your body without putting up a fight. Now, there are some things genuinely to be afraid of. If this were yellow fever and we didn't know what was causing it, you would be hearing an entirely different tune from me now.
One of these things.
Betcha.
Yeah, absolutely.
You betcha. But my immune system against fear is not that I don't fear anything. My immune system is not like, there's nothing to worry about it at all. My immune system fights back against the fear by trying to find out what is actually going on. And when you hear things like, the vast majority of people who die are people either over the age of 80 or people who are already in respiratory distress, An example of my immune system against fear at work came when I heard that I saw the headline, first American coronavirus death reported in the US. Yeah. I said, okay, let's find out more about that. This is my fear immune system at work. And it turns out that the first man to die of the coronavirus in America, was a man who had been in such respiratory distress, was in the hospital, had already suffered heart failure and was basically at death's door, tested positive for the coronavirus, and so on. Now, that doesn't mean that there's nothing to worry about. But what it does mean is that if they're only saying, hey, the first death in America has occurred, and they don't mention that it occurred in a person who was so critically ill that they very likely wouldn't have been around much longer anyway, then that is an immune response that my body has against unreasonable fear. Now it starts to say to me, okay, now we need to start finding out what is it that we need to be afraid of here. And we start to be able to contain inside ourselves this fear by understanding more about what there is to be afraid of.
Wow, a lot to chew on there, and I'm going to get to your question after I've said just a couple of other things first. Number one, the first best thing you can do to avoid catching something nasty is to behave as though you might catch something nasty. And that's just to take the simple precautions that Scott was talking about a few minutes ago. You wash your hands, you don't get in large crowds if you don't have to, and all the rest of the very simple precautions you can take. That immediately cuts your odds of catching a virus, fear or otherwise, right down. The precautions you can take against the fear virus rather than the coronavirus would be to avoid social media if you can. I'm a bit of I gave up Twitter, but now I'm on Facebook more, and it's all good. But I avoid that kind of stuff. There's no good that can come from it. And if I can riff on Selena Zito for a moment, you may know her. She may be the best national level shoe leather reporter in the country. She was one of the first to report on Donald Trump thoroughly and honestly back in 2015. And she coined a great phrase about Donald Trump's supporters and his detractors, particularly his establishment detractors. She said his supporters take him seriously, but not literally. You know, he's a booster. He shoots off at the mouth. If you're on his side, you're the best person ever. And 5 minutes later, you're not on his side and you're the worst person ever. This is how a booster talks. What she said about his detractors, however, is that they take him literally, but not seriously. Every single thing out of his mouth is the end of the world. And by the way, he's an oafish clown. And it's bad math. When it comes to something like a virus, again, whether it's an actual virus or this fear virus that we're talking about today, you need to take it seriously, but not hysterically.
That's right.
If you take it hysterically, you're going to hurt yourself and those around you. If you take it seriously, you protect yourself from that. And that's where we get to this immune system idea you were talking about that I find so fascinating. Years ago, I think during around 2005, Virginia Postrel, former editor of Reason Magazine, writer of some renown, I really enjoy her work, coined the phrase depression lust, where typically the left always wants every economic blip to turn into a Great Depression so they can seize political power again. Rahm Emanuel, the Barack Obama advisor and former mayor of Chicago now, said, never let a crisis go to waste. It's the same mentality. And sometimes, you have to manufacture the crisis. And Bill, on a number of occasions, you've described a free press as being the antibodies, the immune system of a free nation. They're the things that are supposed to attack the bad things in our bodies, like corrupt politicians who break their oaths of office to uphold the Constitution and all the rest. Well, when it comes to a story like coronavirus and COVID-19, we don't really have an immune system. We have viral cheerleaders more than anything else.
Carriers.
Carriers. That would be a much better term. I pulled this up earlier. Forgive the screen glowing on my face here. But MSNBC host Nicole Wallace hopes coronavirus tanks Trump's presidency. And they also quoted Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press telling Matt Bai from the Washington Post that this could be and this is a quote, this is Chuck Todd saying, the coronavirus could be what the Iran hostage crisis was to the final year of Carter's presidency. Not his fault, but it's a test in real time. This is what it seems to be for Trump. And of course, the implication being that this is going to be what sinks Trump, just like it helped to sink Carter. So the worst fear vector, or the worst vector we have for this fear virus, I'm afraid, is the very media that's supposed to be helping us by protecting us, by giving us the injections of truth that we need to fight off this fear. So my advice to everybody is read stuff from the CDC. They've got some good stuff. Talk to your doctor if he's got a few minutes. I don't think they'll mind that much. Just don't barge in and demand an appointment right away. But be sensible. And for God's sake, avoid CNN, avoid MSNBC. And if you're looking for news on Facebook, I got a tip for you. Go back to sharing lolcats.
So we have self-quarantine as a means of stopping the fear virus. We have our immune system in terms of our ability to manage fear, recognize fear, and isolate each individual case of something new to be afraid of and decide what part of this do I need to be afraid of? How do I prevent whatever harm I can from this by being afraid of the parts I should be afraid of and not worrying about the parts that I shouldn't, and so on and so on and so on. Now, there's finally a third part of our defense against biological viruses that we can use against this sociological virus, this fear virus, and that is the idea of immunity. Our immune system fights off intruders that are trying to kill us, and it often takes a while for that immune system to recognize that this foreign body is in fact trying to kill us. And that's how people get sick and die. They get a disease, a virus starts to get a foothold. And by the time the immune system recognizes that there's a problem, the virus has such a foothold and is able to do so much damage. Now it's a life and death battle between the offense and the defense to see who wins. But one of the reasons we're all here watching this is because the miracle of our immune system is so magnificent that it is not only able to fight off invaders, it's able to remember. It's able to remember that it fought off invaders, and it's able to remember them by name. When you are immunized against something, when you get a vaccine for smallpox, let's say, or yellow fever, whatever the case may be, you are purposely injecting into your body a greatly weakened, if not completely killed version of a deadly disease. Your body takes a little bit of time to recognize this, but since it's not virulent, since it's not so powerful, it's not going to kill you, your body recognizes this as an invader, and that means that when the real thing comes, when yellow fever really comes, if you get bitten by a mosquito that's carrying yellow fever, you will not develop yellow fever because your body immune system instantly recognizes that this is something that has to be destroyed and the virus never gets a foothold, and that's why you become immune to diseases that you've been immunized against. So how does this apply to the fear virus? How does this apply to the sociological effect? Well, for me, immunization against fear means looking back at things that I was afraid of before and remembering them the way my immune system remembers intruders and so on. I remember the panic around Ebola, and then I learned about Ebola, and I learned that Ebola is hard to catch, but if you do catch it, it's not pleasant business, but it could be contained, and it was. Then I started looking into things like, well, what about the last big flu epidemic? Well, we have flu every single year. COVID-19 is worse than getting the flu. Let's not kid ourselves. The mortality rate for COVID-19 is significantly higher than it is for the seasonal flu, but it is nothing like the flu epidemic that wiped out 20 million lives in 1919 and 1920. It's not that disease, and therefore, I'm not as afraid of it because that disease was killing 40, 50% of the people it infected. That's something to genuinely be afraid of. And so my personal immune system against fear is capable of remembering what I was afraid of before, and having survived it before, I can now apply those standards to it now. And furthermore, I can remember talking about social fear now. I can remember being terrified that everybody would get Ebola. I remember everybody being terrified that they'd get the swine flu. I remember everybody being terrified that they were going to die of SARS. I especially remember everybody saying that the world was going to come to an end on December 31st of 1999, when every single computer was going to fail and jet aircraft were going to fall out of the sky and traffic lights weren't going to work with the Y2K virus. I remember being told that the ozone hole was going to kill kill us all. I remember being told that acid rain was going to kill us all. I remember being told that we're going to die because there were too many Africanized bees. I remember being told we're going to die because there were not enough bees. I remember being told all these things. And my immune system against fear is able to understand that in the initial stage of a fear pandemic, which is what we're in now, your body's emotional immune system is fighting against something that it doesn't know. But if you know this disease, and every immunity is different. The reason we get a cold is because the cold virus changes so fast we're not immune to it. If it didn't change so fast, you get the cold once in your life, and you'd be immune to cold the same way you're immune to measles and everything else that you're immune to, including yellow fever. So my immune system is able to remember these things. Now, I have come to realize that a virus goes through a population because it needs fuel. A virus needs fuel. It needs people that it can infect and spread to other people. If you quarantine yourself against spreading fear, you are slowing down, if not stopping, the fear virus that is sweeping this country. If you're able to use your own immune system by assessing risk and finding out what the actual dangers are, you're immunizing yourself against this virus, and you are not giving the virus any fuel, any place to continue to grow, and you're not allowing it to spread. If you use your immunity of looking back at other times that you were afraid of things that didn't happen and use that to apply to your fear, you're also denying the virus the fuel it needs to spread. And folks, I came to a conclusion a couple of days ago as I watched toilet paper disappearing from shelves and so on. I came to a realization that's going to sound very strange to most of you, but I firmly believe that this is what's going to happen. The fear virus is going to burn itself out in society because in another week or two, people are going to get bored. They're going to be bored. Now, they're going to be bored, and this fear virus is going to go away because they are going to not see what they feel like they're going to see, whether they know it or not. They're not going to see people walking the streets in level 5 biosuits, with air conditioning packs on their back, and they're not going to see Jeeps going down the street with guys with M16s. They're not going to see bodies being carted away in droves. They're not going to see stacks of body bags, which is what we feel when we hear that word pestilence. That's what we fear. And when those things don't appear, when the evidence doesn't appear, then the fear will burn itself out. It'll run out of fuel. As a quick coda to this, two of the three of us, as we record this now on March 10th, two of your three hosts have close relatives one of them who has certainly tested positive and had the coronavirus, one of whom may have it right now. My cousin was on board a cruise ship in Australia. She was positive with the coronavirus. She got the coronavirus. She had a bad head cold for 2 days, and now she's fine. That reduces my fear level significantly. It doesn't mean that another relative I have who has a severe respiratory problem, it doesn't mean I tell her, nothing to worry about. But I'm putting my fear where it belongs. I'm not afraid of everything. I'm afraid for my sister. That's who I'm afraid for, because she's the one at risk. And my fear is manageable now, and I can take action now, and I can take effective action now, because I'm no longer afraid of everything. I'm afraid of what I should be afraid of. And that's all we're asking for here, folks. All we're asking for here is for you to manage the fear that you have by understanding what this particular disease and this particular pestilence is and is not. And then, like an adult, learning to be afraid of the things you need to be afraid of and acting on those things rather than running around so terrified that action of any kind is impossible. I hope this helps. If it doesn't, that's fine. Read about the 1919 flu epidemic and read about what a genuine, deadly pandemic looks like. Or the yellow fever outbreak of, I wrote the years down, 1893 or 1878. Look at what a genuine pestilence looks like. And you will learn right away that what we're going through now is serious, but it's not one of those. I hope this helped. And if it did, I hope you spread it, because little things like this are inoculations against the real problem, which is what this fear is doing to our society and what it's going to continue to do to our society, and how the fear is going to get people killed in a way that the virus won't. I'm Bill Whittle. This is Steve Green and Scott Ott. This program is made possible by a very small number of very dedicated anti-fear surgeons who have decided to fund this kind of antiviral research. And if you want to be one of those people that does their best to check this kind of spread of diseases, of sociological events, you can go over to billwhittle.com and join the Yellow Fever Havana Commission for the preservation of sanity in America, and allow us to let our fear act in a way that gets real results rather than makes things worse. We'll see you next week right here on Right Angle.